everyone. We are really looking forward to this discussion today on founder mental health, which is such an important topic, with Andy Dunn, the former founder of Bonobos. Throughout the session, if you would like to ask questions anonymously, please feel free to message me directly and I'll ask Andy for you. If you prefer to ask live, you can also always take yourself off mute and ask directly. Dawn Dobras is the former CEO of Credo Beauty and an entrepreneur in residence at the Rock Center, and she will be moderating our session today. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dawn to get us started. Thanks, Dawn.
Great. Well, I'm seeing some familiar faces here as you guys all roll in from Zoom. So hi, everyone. Thrilled to be here and actually trying not to fangirl because I am a big fan of Andy Dunn. I was just mentioning with Andy back in the day when the internet was happening, and that's predating probably many people on this call. Andy and Bonobos were like the darling of the industry. And I was actually at Gap at the time and in a strategy role. And I remember we were like laser focused watching everything that Bonobos did. And it was really groundbreaking when you launched that company. Flash forward many, many years later, and a friend sent me this book and was like, you've got to read this. It's really incredible. And I picked it up. I read lots of business books and frankly, don't finish a lot of them. And immediately I was gripped by this one. And it resonated on many levels. It resonated because I work with lots of founders and the process of entrepreneurship can be described as crazy. And it can be described as out-of-body experience. And it is filled with highs and lows that only if you've gone through fundraising, if you've kind of reached for the stars and also seen the bottom sides of it, you know how hard it is on your mental health. And I read this book, Burn Rate, and I was blown away, Andy, that you would be so transparent and so open about your journey. And frankly, I learned a lot. And I, first of all, want to thank you for being transparent and being what I would say the face of this dialogue out here certainly in the US entrepreneurship of how do we think about mental health. So we're going to be monitoring chat. If you feel comfortable asking a question at any point, we'll save time at the end for questions. We could spend the entire time talking about Andy's success. He is not only a founder of Bonobos, but has a new company right now, which we'd love to hear about. But I'd also like to really dive into your story, practical tips for founder health, and I don't know, kind of where you are right now. I'm taking it away to you.
Yeah, no, can't wait. I was joking with Dawn that when she was at Gap, if she would have just acquired Bonobos, it could have saved me, 5 years on the roller coaster, and we would be old friends now. But it's exciting to be here with you, and thanks everyone. I can't imagine how busy you all are for making some time today. We will aspire to make it worth your while.
So I'm wondering, Andy, many people do know your story, but could you briefly overview of how did you get to writing this book? What was the journey that got you there?
Yeah, I was just tired of being ashamed. I spent so many years imputing shame from having bipolar. And, we were talking before, we do this interesting thing with bipolar, often mental illness in general, which is we conflate the identity and the illness. So I spent 2 decades thinking, oh, I am bipolar. And it was only as I was writing the book and reflecting on this and spending time with my psychiatrist that it's like, no, I have bipolar, right? We would never say someone is cancer. That'd be a terrible thing to say.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes we say it. We say someone is cancerous in the workplace or something, but even that's terrible. And we're still using an adjective. We would never say someone is a physical illness. And yet for some reason with mental health, we say you are the illness. And, as someone that was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 20, it is a hard enough diagnosis to take on just to know that you have it, let alone to be it, to literally like embody it, to be some kind of human stain, to be a disorder. I mean, it's already bad enough to have one. So for me, a big part of writing the book was selfish, which is I just wanted to like get the shame out of my body. And the way to get shame out of our bodies is to speak about what we are ashamed of, or what we are made to feel ashamed of. Shame is by definition what is unspeakable. So if you can say it, then what you're saying is like, there is no shame in this. And I can remember a moment, there's a vignette in the book where I talk about something really gross involving fecal matter. And my mom read the draft and she's like, do we have to put this in? And I talked to my psychiatrist about it. And I was like, do we have to put this in? He's like, oh my God, you have to put that in. Because the whole scene is from Bellevue psychiatric ward where I was for a week. And there's kind of a whole exchange I had with the security guard there. And he's like, it is so Bellevue. And also, who cares, right? Like, it's okay. Like, having been psychotic is okay. There's no shame in it. What would be wrong would be to not be accountable to getting better. What would be wrong would be to hide the story when it could be in service of other people. And so that was the twofold purpose of Burn Rate, to expunge the shame and to be in service of other people by being transparent with the story.
So and I think actually the name of what we picked today was this idea of a perfect founder. And, what I'm listening to you say is a very evolved state of obviously being willing to talk about a weakness. And in this case, it is a condition that you're sharing. But my memory of fundraising is that you are trying to project this perfect founder, and that you're so worried about showing any weakness. And I'll just say that as a female founder, I just felt like I needed A+ across the board all the time. And I am, I wonder, like, and in the beginning when you're fundraising, you're thinking about this, how do you think about like being okay not being perfect?
First of all, I have to say I so empathize with what you said about the female founder part, not from personal experience, obviously, but from watching my wife fundraise. My wife is so much more accomplished already than 97.4% of male founders that get funded. And I see how hard she's working to secure funding, and it drives me effing bananas. So I feel that. Look, I think there is a strategic amount of vulnerability that we can deploy in our lives to be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can't comment on the gender side of it, but from my experience, I overestimated how important it was to try to come off like everything was going well, and underestimated the potential to build more trust by being the right amount of vulnerable. And that's about not only what you say, but when. And I think it's okay to like try to be wildly positive and strong in your first meeting, let's say like you're pitching or something. But it's also okay to dial in a little bit of like, oh, this is a reality-based person too.
Yeah.
Because no one actually wants to back a perfect founder. I want to back a founder who is really good at what they do. And part of being good at what you do is knowing where what you're doing is not working, and knowing where you personally have challenges that you can improve. So as someone that makes investments, I look for founders, not who are perfect, but who can evolve rapidly. And evolving rapidly requires self-awareness and candor. It requires some other things too, but self-awareness and candor are part of it. And part of being self-aware and candid is being able to be vulnerable. And it actually builds more influence, I think, than projecting, strength. At least I'd like to believe that, projecting strength all the time.
I agree. And we've both had this experience of being founders and now being on the investing side. And it's interesting for me to be on that other side where I am actually looking for self-awareness and some vulnerability in the founders. And so for all the founders on the phone here or on the Zoom here, I want to emphasize that point, because I think there is a desire to be perfect in these pitches and not to show any vulnerability. And so I'm going to underline this. You have two investors and two founders here saying, like, it is okay to show some vulnerability. And that is actually a skill set that investors are looking for. I'm going to dial it back a little bit. When you were going through kind of understanding your diagnosis and also building a company at the same time, you describe a lot about what you describe as hypomania and intense highs and lows. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. There's one quote that you lead into, I don't know if it's your forward or your afterward, but it says, my book, it's about the intersection of mental illness and entrepreneurship. And my friend says, aren't those the same thing? So I think there's something really interesting about starting a company and highs and lows and the overlap of mental illness that you went through.
Yeah. Well, everyone responds to data, so I'll just give you some data. So bipolar illness, we think is 2% of the general population of American adults, 11% for entrepreneurs, according to a study from UCSF, 5-to-1 ratio, ADHD, 3-to-1 ratio, depression, 2-to-1 ratio, so on and so forth. And across all stripes of neurodiversity, we believe that the data will show an over-indexing of some kind. That includes things like substance use, that includes things like suicide, sadly. All of these different kinds of mental conditions over-index on entrepreneurs. Why? We could make that the subject of another book. But I think what we need to come to realize is if we have one of these stripes of neurodiversity, it actually means we're more probable to be successful at what we do. And one of the mood states that we all have access to by definition, set aside mania and psychosis, which is its own thing. It probably sounds very foreign to you if you don't know anyone who's been through that, if you've never been through it. Depression probably is more commonly understood. 1 in 5 American adults will experience it at some point in their lives. During COVID, we think that number was as high as 33%. For entrepreneurs, I'm guessing probably half the people on this call have been through what could be like a diagnosable episode of depression, acute depression. And I hope you go to a doctor when you feel that way and get medication, because medication is the best for depression. And by the way, it doesn't mean you have to take it every day for the rest of your life, as I do with the mood stabilizer I take. It can just like be a boost for a period of time in combination with therapy. There's my plug for therapy and medication.
Second, I think it's really important. Get help, talk to somebody. All right. Keep going, Andy. Sorry. I'm just going to underline things I think are important.
Yeah. Wait, what was the question originally? Forgot. It was on a roll.
I was just talking about hypomania and
okay. So hypomania.
Yeah.
So hypomania is a mood state that is elevated mood, but shy of mania or psychosis. And so the diagnostic fancy term DSM criteria, the psychiatric apparatuses criteria for hypomania are flight of ideas, racing speech, relentless optimism, delusional self-belief, lack of sleep, increasing irritability and distractibility, and then sometimes mediocre to poor judgment on financial matters, sexual matters, relationship risk-taking, and increased correlation with substance use. That set of criteria, if you take like 4 or 5 of those 10, is kind of like an entrepreneur having a good day.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
It is central casting for an entrepreneur having a good day. And there's a book called The Hypomanic Edge that talks about how in capitalism and really any creative pursuit, hypomania is jet fuel for success. If we have as my psychiatrist, Dr. Z, I refer to him affectionately in the book, says, might we all be controllably hypomanic every day? That would be like a 7.5 out of 10 on the mood scale every day, having a ton of energy, a ton of self-belief. That's actually a great zone to be a builder. The problem is it, for bipolar, comes with a price. And that price is that you have access to a lot of hypomanic energy, and you tend to pay for that with depression. So I don't know. What do you guys think? How many days do you have a year where you feel like amazing, where you're just in a flow state work-wise? 20, 30, 50? For me, it would be like 200. And for example, Bonobos, there was not much seed capital support at the time. So we raised our first 8 million from 100 investors over 3 years, and probably another 900 who said no. It was like a hypomanic endeavor. I would do 3 fundraising meetings a day, 4 fundraising meetings a day. I had a breakfast, lunch, dinner, and drinks meeting like every day, or some kind of a social engagement. The line was blurred. And so we need to find a way to harness the benefits of whatever our neurodiversity is, but contain the damage, right? Contain the potential downside, however you want to describe it. So now that I see a psychiatrist twice a week, I have 5 different medications in the hopper, I probably have 30 hypomanic days a year. And my doctor will say, how are you feeling today? I'll be like 5 out of 10. And he's like, great. He's like, this is called normal adulthood, whatever normal means. And my wife, who's like a 5 out of 10 every day, jokes with me. She's like, give me some of that 8 out of 10. She's like, how do I get hypomanic? So this is set aside mental illness. This is an understanding of mental health that we all need to have. You don't need to have a mood disorder to be thoughtful about mood and how mood impacts decision making, how you show up with others, how to harness the best of one's mood, and then know how to deal with when your mood goes the other way, right? Because part of the entrepreneurial journey is also the days where you're like, this is never going to work. I'm never going to be able to raise next round. The strategy's failing. I'm not good at hiring. And how do we manage this like paradox of doing the same job and being the same person and having days where our outlook is very different? And we're all on that roller coaster, right? Whether there's an underlying mood issue that's amplifying it or not.
So when I was reading your book, I was like, wow, I'm relating to all of this. Maybe I'm undiagnosed here, but this relentless sense of optimism, the need for just so much energy during fundraising. And, you glossed over some of those stats, but I'd like to fundraising right now is hard for all entrepreneurs, unless you're an AI, I guess. And it is relentless energy. And regardless of the depth of this hypomania or just entrepreneurial spirit, the idea of taking care of your mood and not being able to stay there relentlessly for an entire year, it's just, you have to take care of yourself as an entrepreneur and as the founder. Otherwise, you don't see the other side.
1,000%. And I think concrete ideas on that. One is just having 3 months a year where you're having a weekly one-on-one conversation with someone who's not codependent. So codependent is a partner, codependent is a family member, codependent in a way is a friend, although platonic friends probably give us some of the best advice because the codependence is the lowest of all our personal relationships. Very codependent is our co-founders, team members. Again, team members like the right amount of vulnerability, probably not too much, but just enough. So it's hard to be fully candid. And so what this means is having an executive coach or a therapist who we spend 3 months a year in a one-on-one dialogue with every year as an entrepreneur. And if you're not comfortable with therapy or you don't think that's right for you, then a coach is a great way to do it. I put out a list on Substack of 227 executive coaches that were recommended by other entrepreneurs. And I think it is so important to take advantage of that. And my advice to entrepreneurs is expense your out-of-pocket expenses for either coaching. Sorry, I got to turn my phone off. Expense your out-of-pocket for either coaching or therapy, because it is one of the best investments the company can make above and beyond your salary.
Underscore. I was too late to the game in that I look back on my professional career and wish that I had gotten coaching or independent board director, or, you can call it a lot of different things, therapy, someone to be a sounding board on a regular basis that was in my corner. So if all founders on this call today, one piece of advice, 100%, take care of yourself. And that means get someone in your corner that you can speak with. I liked how you characterize someone who's not codependent, because you will have all those people that you complain to or vent to, or they celebrate your successes, but it's not your team. It's not your family. It's someone that can help you talk about how crazy this ride is and give you advice. I wanted to talk a little bit about fundraising. Full disclosure, I was blown away at your relentlessness of fundraising, and you were doing it at a time before DTC brands were really the sweethearts of the industry and not well funded. So how did you think about this? And on some of your bad days, how did you get out of bed, or how did you motivate yourself to keep fundraising?
Yeah, it was interesting. In 2015, I went through the most severe depression of my life. And I had 3 months where I couldn't get out of bed really before 1 or 2 p.m. And it was kind of at the peak of the the problems caused by bipolar in my life, prior to finally accepting the diagnosis and being in treatment, which happened next year. And at the time I was staying in Beijing with my girlfriend, who every day would come home, my now wife, and say, like, tell me 3 things you're grateful for. And like, couldn't answer because I was just so down. So I would say, you, Manuela. That was an easy win. And then like coffee, because I was drinking like 10 coffees a day just to get from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. And the reason why I was in that state outside of the underlying bipolar is I had left my job. I had hired a CEO to come in and take Bonobos to the next level. I moved to the executive chairman role, whatever that means. We can talk about what executive chairman, I still don't know what they do, but that's what I did. And, I'd kind of like fired myself, partly because I was just so burnt out after 8 years. But what I realized from sinking into that depression was that Bonobos actually had been like a mood stabilizer to me, because the job had required me to show up in a certain way on behalf of the greater good, like primarily to make payroll for our team. And so I was happy to let myself down as a human being, but I was unwilling to let other people down. And so it's sort of interesting to look back in retrospect that the fact that direct to consumer can be such a shitty business model and requires so much capital gave me something to do that was urgent. And in a lot of ways, those urgent moments where like the company was going to fail if I didn't do X were the easiest moments for me to manage psychologically, because I had to. It was slipping into depression would come from when I didn't have an urgent thing to do. So in a weird way, and this is not healthy, but in a weird way, building a company was a form of mood stabilizer, at least in terms of being depression avoidant.
Right.
Being able to get out of depressions after 6 weeks or 3 months, which is unacceptably long. But I was also an alcoholic at the time to contain hypomania. Alcohol is funny in that you drink it often when you feel excited. You associate it with positive mood, but it's a downer, right? Elvis, uppers and downers, whatever. So alcohol became my way of muting the hypomania. And I would be out till, 1 or 2 in the morning and drinking. And then I'd be back at work the next morning at 6 or 7. And people would just be like, how do you do this? And I didn't have the honest answer, which is that I have this, condition where I have this hypomanic state, and alcohol is actually enabling me to not become psychotic, because it's a downer, because it's giving me shitty sleep. And that actually can keep one from ascending up.
Interesting. So one of the most interesting parts of your book for me was disclosure. And we started out the conversation here about how impressed I am about your transparency, but I've got to believe that in the moment, when things were unfolding, that you had to come share what was going on with your board, with your team, with your loved ones, that was, it really feels like a split in the road, and you really handled it, at least in your book, incredibly well. I was really like, wow, he really did the right thing and handled it well. But can you kind of take us back to what disclosure felt like? And I imagine you were pretty worried about doing all that. Or was it just,
Well, I just want to be clear. I was not courageous about the decision to disclose, perhaps about the process, but the decision was forced upon me. You know, the table setting, for those of you who has time to read a book, right? There's a 15-minute TED talk if you want the cliff notes. And the headline is, I was in a psychiatric ward 9 years into Bonobos for a week. At the time, we had 400 employees, $100 million business. We raised over 100 million in capital. And I had the second psychotic episode. I hadn't really had one since I was diagnosed when I was 20. I spent a week in the psych ward at Bellevue, and I was like finally ready to deal with having this issue, which really I didn't have. I had never accepted. You know, my family were Punjabi Indian immigrants on my dad's mom's side, Scandinavian Midwesterners on my dad's side, and very different cultures, but with one thing in common, which is like, you don't talk about mental health, right? Mental health is like Fight Club. You don't talk about it. Everyone knows it's there. So everyone knew I had this psychotic break. Everyone knew I went through ups and downs, but like, we didn't talk about it. And that was part of the culture. And I think it was Midwestern as well. So it wasn't until the mania came roaring back that it was like, all right, I'm 36 now versus 20. It's obvious that manic depressive illness, I've like presented with it longitudinally, right? Time to deal with it. So as I came down from the psychosis in the hospital, all this medication, amazing medical care at Bellevue, I was like ready to take medication, go see a doctor, let's go deal with this. And I walked out of Bellevue, excited to reunite with my family and my now wife and girlfriend. And I got arrested by four NYPD officers. And I was taken to jail and booked for felony and misdemeanor assault that I didn't remember from having been manic. I like had some sense of what's coming because the psychiatrist had tipped me off, but I really was blindsided. And that set off another difficult part of the journey, not just of dealing with the mental illness and of the impact on the business and loved ones, but the criminal justice system. And my doctor calls it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: mental illness, criminal justice, homelessness, and substance use. And so I also got to see like how much privilege enabled me to navigate that, being able to afford a great psychiatrist, afford a great lawyer, having supporting family. I just got my arrest record expunged from the FBI, even though it was ultimately understood to be a mental health episode.
Wow.
That's a whole nother conversation about how like rigged the system is. So that happened, and it was like a public arrest record. The arresting officer was taking my pictures, and I was like, are these going to be on the internet? And he turned around and goes, dude, you're not the founder of Google. You sell pants. Because he had like looked me up. So
Right.
I was fortunate in that I wasn't like that internet famous. Like, had I been, this would have been a public matter. It would have been like founder of Bonobos, named after, peace-loving chimpanzee charged with violent assault. The headline becomes the story. I hadn't even processed it, probably stepped down from the job, all this stuff that I like narrowly averted. I was like in and out of court in New York, like wearing like a low hat. I had dated the beat reporter for Page 6 in the New York Post. I was like, please God, tell me she's not here. It was a really, really difficult time. And so the only thing I did was what I had to do, which is I had to disclose what I'd been through and what the underlying condition was to my board of directors, to my executive team, to get input on like how folks wanted to get through it. Did people want me to step down? What would happen? And everyone backed me, which was like another vector of enormous luck and privilege. They were like, we back you, like, to get through this. And we did. And then the next year was like pure magic. After going through this horrifying mania, the depression that followed, I didn't want to live for the next 6 months. Finally getting on the right medication, navigating the company through it. And like 2017 was beautiful. 10-year anniversary of the company, sold the company for 300 million, got married, converted to Judaism, and the Cubs won the World Series. And it was just like this amazing year. And no one knew, 25 people knew what had actually happened the previous year. And I think that was the third reason for writing the book is I felt like a fraud. I felt like the actual story of my life was so much more interesting than the projected story of this like living the dream bullshit that we do.
Mhm.
Everyone is suffering. The Buddha guarantees this, right? Life is suffering. And so to the extent that we can, when we spend time with each other, let's be honest about that suffering because it's connecting. It's more interesting than success.
Mhm.
Success is okay. Let's learn a bit from it, but let's connect over the hard stuff. And that was, probably the third goal of the book was like, what you guys think you know about me, not that many people were paying attention, is like total BS compared to the actual story. And I celebrate my wife for being like, yeah, let's put the real story out there. Like, let's tell people what we've been through.
All right. I have like 15 follow-up questions because thank you for sharing that. And, reading that in the book and listening to your TED talk on this, I really think that you're a credit to all founders, but all people as well, of sharing the story because it's a tough one to get out. And you're right. It is not behind these facades of amazing founder, raising this, selling the company. There's a lot that people don't know about and don't talk about. I think quite a bit about your board member, and I think his name was Joel,
Yeah.
who said we back you. We have
Yeah.
confidence in you. And it makes me think, I thought that was quite a magic moment in
Yeah.
that, wow, number one, you had a board that really believed in you. Number two, there was a board member that was courageous enough to say, we're going to stick with you. And I'm just curious, did you know that they had your back so much going into that? Or is that the outcome you expected?
I wasn't surprised. I had such a great board
Mhm.
and I had built real one-on-one relationships with everyone. Like I can remember sitting down with a partner from Excel when I was in San Francisco who was on our board. And like, I brought my mom to the lunch because like my mom is the best. Everyone loves my mom. And I was like, if he meets my mom, he can't fire me. He's just going to feel bad. He's going to be thinking about her and the impact
I
on her.
like that advice. Bring your mom to the
Bring
pitch
your
meeting,
mom, bring
and
your
it's like
kids,
cushioned. Yeah.
get to know your executive team and your board on a really intimate level, because it's just going to build a better relationship over time. Like, go deep. Doesn't mean you do it right away, but over time. I was lucky though, was that we had such a wisdom, coming from Joel. And Joel was an investor, but he was a small investor. He was a real CEO. And so he knew, and I think also, 7 kids and he has 20 grandkids. So like he's been through life.
Yeah.
And anyone who's been through life, it gets exposed to this kind of stuff. Like there's not a single person who makes it to the age of 40 without being thrown on their ass by something unexpected. And if you make it to the age of 60, you've just been around stuff. There's not a family untouched by severe mental illness if you go as wide as cousins and up 3 generations, somewhere in that orbit, just like it's just math, as someone who's dealt with something really difficult from a mental illness standpoint, setting aside the mental health challenges that we all deal with. And there's not any of us who make it to a certain age without having been through an acute mental health crisis, because those are driven by things that life just hands us no matter what. Grief, financial stress, moving, a breakup. Breakups are, by the way, like breakups are terrible.
Right.
We all deal with those, right?
Divorce, like restarting, like there's a lot.
We all deal with it. So the bigger our aperture is to have empathy for those experiences, the more we're going to be able to show up in these times of crisis as allies to people who are going through a time of crisis. And Joel played that role. And I remember on the board call where I disclosed what I'd been through, that I'd just been charged with felony assault. It's a pretty big like setting aside the mental
Yeah.
health, it's like, holy shit, like what's happening here? And Joel's first question, because what happened is spoiler alert here on the book, I struck my now wife. She and her mom were trying to prevent me from running naked in the streets of Greenwich Village. I hit my now wife. I pushed and kicked my now mother-in-law. I have a dark joke about this, which is many people would like to push and kick their mother-in-law. I actually got to. I don't know if that's too dark of a joke.
It's a little bad, but I'll let you do it.
It's a really bad, but this shit has to be funny in some regard. It's so dark. In fact, they're working on a TV show now inspired by Burn Rate, and it's actually done as a dark comedy, which I so love because like humor is a vehicle for understanding.
I'm a fan of Bad Sisters, so I like the dark comedy.
Oh my God. And the woman writing it is brilliant. She's one of the exec producers of Ozark, and she helped render, if you saw Ozark, the Laura Linney's brother character in season 3 who has manic depressive illness, she's a genius. So, you know, I advise all entrepreneurs to put CEOs on your board. Anytime you add an investor who's never been a CEO, add an independent CEO director, because there's just like a different level of judgment and experience that comes from having like been in the chair.
Yeah.
And getting someone who's 20 to 30 years older than you, who's been in that chair, there's just like a different perspective they have. They're speaking from like the
They've
wise.
seen a lot of shit. Yeah, you've seen a lot of shit at a certain
Seen a
point.
lot of shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have grown kids, like you've just been through stuff. And so Joel, it was amazing because as I was describing the story, his first question was, how's Manuela? It was like, it was the right question. How was Manuela? Right? How is your partner who's gone through this experience? So anyway.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I could keep asking you, Andy. I could take up your whole day because I have like so many questions and like I love your responses here. But look, you're an entrepreneur again. Can you tell us a little bit about your latest venture? Yeah. And also, you mentioned this in your TED Talk about your Olympic regime of just how you keep yourself in place. And so you're back at it again.
Yeah.
And you have a framework or Olympic regime that is keeping you in balance in a spot where you can still create and grow companies. So I'm curious about your new venture and then what you're doing to keep yourself on track.
Yeah. So the easy one is my new venture. So many of you may know this or have seen this, but the Surgeon General just issued a report about 2 months ago that describes social isolation now as a pandemic. So we are spending 20 fewer hours per month with others compared to where we were in 2003, which is shocking because we were already talking about, you know, Starbucks became in the year 2000 the third place,
right,
in terms of where we spend our time after home and work. Now many of us don't even go to work, and when we are at home, if we live with others, what are we doing?
We're
on our screens, right?
Yeah.
So I'm building a new company called Pi, and the goal of Pi is reasonably straightforward, which is to increase social opportunities for everyone. So it's an app that enables you to make small group plans. And then as you build your social graph, you see a feed of things to do that people who are making plans can make open. And the psychology underlying this is that we actually are all more socially inclusive than people think, but the friction to including others is high. Texting people is a pain in the ass.
Right.
And aligning on mutual availability is a pain in the ass. So a lot of plans die, you know, in embryo, because the steps to get them to actually be real plans are too painful for the organizer to endure to get to the plan. So that's what Pi is about. If you're on iPhone, would love for you to check it out. In terms of the regimen, I'll drop some links. In terms of the regimen, sleep is the foundation. So we live with this myth that like low sleep is good in the entrepreneurial phase because we're burning the candle at both ends and we have so much work to do. That's not true. You know, we all need 7 to 8 hours plus of sleep a night. And so we've got to get that sleep as the foundation to spending the other 16 to 17 hours well. And the marginal trade-off of 1 to 2 hours of sleep to have 17 or 18 waking hours or 18 or 19 waking hours, the hit that you take on productivity because you're not well rested is too high. And so we could talk about a bunch of things.
You're
but
talking to a
first step-
sleeper, like I'm like, or a ring, like, yeah, sleep
Yeah.
is the bedrock. Underline that for every founder on the phone. Sleep is your bedrock.
Yeah. And so the first step is to just measure it, whether that's like Fitbit or Oura Ring or Apple Watch. It's more specific. Like we all need an hour and 15 minutes of REM. We need 2 to 3 hours of deep sleep. So you can actually sleep long and not have a good night's sleep. So the first step is to measure it. And then the second step is to like protect it, to be a guardian of it. And so what does that mean? We have to start winding down. You know, you can't sleep unless you're acting sleepy. So like if your goal is to be asleep by 11, probably by about 9:30, you need to be off devices. If you are on devices, which I am, by the way, blue light glasses, right? And then a transition to like reading a book at some point. You need to create a routine for yourself. So if that's like a cup of chamomile tea at 9, you need to tell your body that you're sleeping. You need a very dark room. You ideally need the temperature to be 68 degrees. There are all these things you can do, like treat sleep like a goal.
Right.
Like it's like working out. If you do work out, like it's like a regimen. So for me, sleep is the foundation. The next step is medication. In my case, I have to take medication. There's one I take every day. There's 4 others in the hopper. I think we should be unafraid to leverage medication as needed, whether that's you're in the depressive zone, maybe that's you need some sleep aid. That's bedrock for me. Third is transparency about mood. So the way we talked earlier at the beginning about like telling stories is how we get shame out of our bodies. Words, they say tears are pain leaving the body, right? Like the reason it's good to cry when you're sad is you are metabolizing that. What's the Disney movie Inside Out?
Yeah,
like what's sadness for?
Right.
Expressing sadness is how the sadness exits your body, and it invites the empathy of others. That's what it's for, right? Because we need each other. So that's the next part.
I was
What?
going to say, as a nation, we always respond, how are you doing? And I did it this morning. Good, right? We're not always good.
I always say terrible. It's the best. Someone's like, how you doing? You'd be like, terrible. You know what happens? People
Right.
immediately pay attention.
Right.
And they're like, what's terrible? And you're like, building startups, it's the worst.
If you
Or
start
like,
to think about substituting, not using the word good.
don't use good. Tell the truth.
Yeah. Tell the truth.
Or say like, you know what? Life's a little bit of a roller coaster, but today's kind of a good day.
Right.
And that's also like a little more interesting. It's acknowledging versus like exchanging platitudes. And I think that transparency goes to like transparency with our loved ones. It's having that independent third party, whether a coach or a therapist, for at least 25% of the year. And I think if you're doing those things, then exercise and nutrition, which are very, for me, like elusive. I have like a hard time exercising and eating well. Like I just want to not exercise and eat whatever I want. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. But then anyway, so those are elusive. And that's why I feel like having the bedrock is so important of those of sleep at the foundation and setting aside meds, transparency of mood so that we don't get consumed by our emotions.
I work with one startup, and I actually they came out of the Rock Center. So Hue Beauty, they said I could share this, but they actually have a framework. There's 3 co-founders, and every Friday they check in with each other. They have a whole series of questions that they go through. It's around sleep. It's around mood. I don't know that they've read your book, but they've actually come across this on their own, where they're checking in with each other to make sure that they stay on track. And I thought that was really an important part of their entrepreneurial journey, because there's a lot of highs and lows as they go through all of this.
Yeah, the check-in is so important. And there's a really cool, Lady Gaga endowed something called the Be There certificate with jack.org. It's like a 20-minute online training. It's so good. So like one of the things we assume, I'll drop it in, about mental health stuff is that we are meant to wait until someone brings it up with us to bring something up with them. And the Be There certificate has all these like hot takes that you would like not have guessed, which is the right answer actually is to raise it after 2 weeks. After 2 weeks of observing someone's behavior in a way that concerns you, you have a very neutral, fact-based conversation where you just say, hey, Jimena, I wanted to check in. You know, I just noticed you lacking your usual spirit. I just want to see how you're doing. And like, there's about 5 other examples of how to approach, because Jimena might be like, Andy, I'm really down. And then what I might say is like, I have bipolar 1, I am often down. Wrong. Actually, like, empathy does not include shifting the spotlight in the first conversation. It might be relevant later, but once someone has made a vulnerable disclosure, you never leave them. You never turn the conversation to you. Because what you're thinking as the person disclosing is like, what the F? Like, I'm finally talking about me and now we're back to talking about you again. You know, and so there's like lots of cool things for you and your team. I love socializing with the team as well, because checking in with each other and knowing how to have these conversations. We don't need to be a mental health professional to deploy that most basic of human attributes, which is empathy, you know, in service of trying to take care of each other.
It is interesting, you know, as a long time like leader and manager, it's so interesting to like think about making sure that you weave this in on your one-on-ones, you know, and I think you're doing a long way, and many others, Lady Gaga, you're in good company of normalizing bringing up mental health issues. And I can only think that I probably would have been a better boss and a more empathetic boss had I started that earlier in my own journey as a leader.
Yeah.
I would love to dive in a little bit to your current startup, because I think that this idea of loneliness, kind of what led you to jumping in, and what are you seeing now, particularly post-COVID? And I think of many young people that never have this in-office experience, pros and cons to that, of like human connection.
Yeah. I just have a bunch of people in my life increasingly who are disclose how lonely they are. You know, we're 50% of households now, I think, are not a traditional whatever marriage. And I think there's a lot of good things about that trend, you know, as well. Like, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we have to be, I think, more thoughtful about deploying technology in ways that combat these trends. And social media is sort of a funny term because it's actually such an antisocial behavior, right? Like, if you're on social media, by definition, you're not in conversation, you're not in communion with another person. Our feelings are not always positive on social media, right? It promotes a lot of envy. Social media is sort of the winners are the most narcissistic among us, right?
Right.
And it's a weird dopamine attention loops. So if we've gotten so freaking good at this stuff, at, you know, I don't want to say like manipulating people. I like social media. I'm not like a naysayer type person, but we have to balance that with spending time
Together
with others, and really connecting in a deeper way. And I think let's like deploy our talent against that. So, you know, let's bring in the software engineers and designers and product managers who come from these companies and say, how do we build a company with a different goal, where the goal isn't screen time, but the minimum amount of screen time to deliver value? And, you know, let's automate processes that are difficult. And I kind of mentioned this, the pie idea that I'm working on is like, it's very hard to actually build a benevolent social app.
Yeah.
It's like, I have an investor that was like, I don't like your idea. And I said, why? And he said, anytime I've tried to build something that was good, it failed. And anytime I tried to build something that like preyed on the frailty of human nature, it worked. So
probably true, but
I think therefore we need a lot of people trying. And I don't know if it'll be pie or not. We've got a really inspired team, but that was the impetus behind it, was just like this belief that we can do better, that we can deploy these consumer internet technologies for to combat some of these trends that we're seeing.
One last question. I know you're a father now, right?
Yeah.
So how has parenthood changed you as a founder?
It's my little guy,
Oh,
Isaiah.
so cute.
I met an entrepreneur once, a woman who had started 3 companies, and she had one company she'd started when she had grown children, one company she'd started when she had young children, and one company she had built when she was single. And she said, what do you think was the easiest company to build?
Sure.
And I said, like, grown children or something, I can't remember. And she was like, young children.
Yeah.
Don, I want to know what you're
I
going to say.
fully agree.
Why though?
Well, I always have found that parents are ruthless at prioritization because they have something better. They have something better than work. And so I know, and I'll speak for that as myself as a parent too, mom of 3. You have something else to look forward to. So you focus on the top stuff.
It's something that you have to do, right? Because in theory, like, you can ignore grown children. When I was single, or when I was, without kids, I felt like I could work as much as I wanted. So there's no boundary.
Yeah.
Whereas, with our son, I feel like I have like a table stakes way to spend my time each day that isn't on my company. And that's healthy. It's healthy to be out of it, even if
Healthy,
it's
and it helps
for just a
focus
period
you.
of time.
Yeah, helps
It
focus.
does, and it gives you something else to work for beyond yourself. The flip side is, I sometimes now ask myself, like, is it worth it? Like, my wife's an entrepreneur, she's so all in. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I doing this again? So it's interesting that I'm like wrestling that question down. Like, what would it mean to not need this? What would it mean to not be building something? What would it mean to not be trying to go bigger? And it's too late to answer that question because I've already raised money and have a great team. But maybe healthy to have that dialogue, like, to kind of
I'll give
before
you
going
the
and
flash.
starting the next. Yeah, Don, what do you
I'll
think?
give you the flash forward since I have 3 grown children. You are role modeling and you're shaping their DNA on a path that is taking them in a different direction. So I remember at one point I was in between jobs and I was kind of driving our family crazy. And Jacob, my oldest, said to my husband, please get mom a job. She's driving us all crazy. And I was feeling like, oh, I'm taking time off to help the family. And the point was, I was driving the family crazy. So know that whatever you're doing, you're role modeling a future generation of potential entrepreneurs.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your son. Congratulations on your book. I feel like you also gave us a little bit of insight that you're now part of potentially bringing this to the screen or to streaming, which is very exciting as well. But most of all, I appreciate your transparency. It is important to see role models of all types go through hard things and talk about them, because it gives us a path for dealing with our own issues. And I think it also helps us become role models to others. So I appreciated what you said. And I appreciate that you wrote about it and talked about it. And hopefully it goes to Netflix or whatever streaming service you're working with, and so that more people are out there. Best of luck to your new company. And we appreciate you crossing the big divide from GSB to HBS to offer your words of wisdom.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dawn. Please, everyone, take care of your mental health first and foremost. And I so appreciate you spending some time on this today. I know how busy you all are.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thank you to Rock for hosting this.